listening to the Ocean Rowing Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Painter, physical therapist and owner of Strong and Empowered Rowing. I help people continue their love of rowing without aches and pains. Along the way, I decided I wanted to row across the Atlantic Ocean. I'm finding it super hard to get in touch with previous ocean rowers and find the answers on how to make this possible. So this podcast is to share my story and what I learn as I get ready for and ultimately cross the Atlantic Ocean. Hear from experts in different areas and from others who have completed ocean rows. So anyone who wants to do this has easy access and we can share our stories with the world.
When I did my on-boat training, I lived on the boat. Even when the night before we put the boat in the water, I still lived on the boat. I slept in the boat, on the trailer, in the parking lot. Because that way you can immerse yourself into it and you get to see how comfortable it is, what pieces of equipment will make your life on board more comfortable. And more importantly, stuff that you don't need. I didn't take anything on board while I took a book thinking that, who knows, I might want to read, and it never came out of its plastic cover.
Welcome to episode 5 of the Ocean Rowing Podcast. My name's Amanda Painter and I am your host, and today I interviewed Tim Crockett of Tame the Kraken. Tim crossed the Atlantic Ocean as part of the Talisker Whiskey Atlantic Challenge in December of 2018. He crossed in 63 days, 2 hours, and 37 minutes. He rowed solo all by himself, and he did an amazing job. So in today's interview, I basically ask him a bunch of questions, get the lowdown on some ups and downs that he encountered, and not only that, but I get to learn what he brought with him. So Tim brought some really interesting things with him on his boat. One was a large rubber ducky named Roy as the Royal Guard. And I was following him as he was putting things on Instagram, and I had a blast watching his little rubber ducky and him, and it was actually like a big rubber ducky looking thing, but it was a blast. It brought humor, it gave him something almost like a Wilson, if you will, and I had a blast with it. But he explains Roy, he also slept on a beanbag. Who would imagine bringing a beanbag onto your boat to cross the Atlantic Ocean? Well, Tim did it, said it was a lifesaver for him sleeping, and I think that's amazing. So not only that, but we hear about fundraising, training advice that he has and what he went through, some routine information, and the ultimate on MacGyvering your auto helm. Tim had tons of auto helm issues, and he gives tons of information on all the practical things that you could think of that basically happened to him on his boat, on his ride across the Atlantic Ocean while he was on his boat. And I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And again, this is the Ocean Rowing Podcast. Enjoy the episode.
So I just wanted to see, basically, tell me about your experience and any tips that you have, since I want to row solo. You're the first person I'm talking to who's rowed solo. So I want insight and yeah.
So, right, where to begin? So, if we go back to about 2.5 years ago now, it's easy to start with why. I started, I reconnected with an old buddy of mine that I'd served with in the Marines in the UK, and over sort of social media, Facebook, kind of going through all the good times we boxed together on the core boxing team together, and it was about 6 weeks after we connected, I found out that he'd taken his own life, and while we hadn't been particularly close, we hadn't spoken for over 25 years, that kind of resonated with me. And it was at that time where the 22 push-up challenge was going around, and there was a lot of attention in regard to the 22 veterans that were taking their own lives, and the reports that were coming out at that time. So I wanted to do something, but I didn't know what. And it was maybe a month or so after that, and another guy that I'd known in the service who was part of a team of 6 that was rowing from mainland Europe to Latin America. And it was one afternoon, kind of a break from work. I disappeared down the Google rabbit hole and came across the Talisker and saw that all of the teams that were entered were doing it for one or more charities. And given my background in small boats on the water, I felt that it was a good fit for me. Now, initially, I thought I was going to do it as a pair, and I reached out to a couple of friends of mine that I thought I could spend a couple of months in a small space with, and had some complementary skill sets. And I said, hey, I've got this great idea to row across the Atlantic for charity. Would you be interested? And it took them all of about maybe 20 seconds to politely decline. And at that point, I had about 18 months really to get myself ready, probably less than that if you look at when you have to have everything submitted and into the race folks. So I elected to go and attempt to do things solo. And you do get all these grand plans thinking, oh, yeah, this would be easy. I could do this, I could do that. I've got the right sort of background. I've got a big network. So I made the decision and just went for it. And then you sort of get caught up in the why, again, which is the big motivating factor, and all the hard stuff in fundraising, getting sponsors, getting all the boat stuff ready, getting equipment, getting yourself ready. There's a lot that goes into the campaign, and everybody says it, that the hard part is getting to the start line. And certainly for myself, I felt that was the case, because the other factor for me is I'm here in Atlanta in the US, and my boat was built in the UK. So
you got a Rennoc boat, right?
I did, and that adds another element to it. Now, the guys at Rennoc were incredibly helpful, and they certainly took a lot of the worry off, and that was another reason why I chose to go with them and a new build as opposed to a second-hand boat that perhaps I could get my hands on here. I think while there were challenges in being on a different continent, there were also advantages of having someone that is probably number one in the sport, building the boat, and knowing that I could just say, this is what I need, get it done. And it was then just a matter of finding the funds to keep things moving.
Yep. So you chose to go with a Rennoc boat, totally makes sense. Since people that I'm talking to are mostly in the UK, for the fundraising, that is like my scariest part. Like it takes the hardest thing is getting there. What did you find worked for you for fundraising here? Like, what was successful for you?
I don't think there is a kind of cookie cutter solution to fundraising.
Okay.
Obviously, a solo, it's harder and easier in some extent. So solo, you only have you to, again, make all those calls, send all those emails, have all those conversations. Whereas a team, okay, you may need to get a bigger number in order to pay for everything. You can share the workload. So it's kind of easy and difficult in that sense. And it became a second job for me. I would close my work laptop down at 5 o'clock or at the end of the day, and then turn across to my own laptop, open that up, and start work, and sometimes be working till midnight. There is no easy way. You've just got to be, to some extent, relentless. And you've got to, I would say, looking back at what I did, is that I had some other challenges, some eye surgery that delayed things for me to some extent, which meant that I took my foot off the gas a little bit in regards to searching for sponsors and fundraising. So I would say, if everything lines up, decide on your campaign, decide on kind of what you're going to do and how you're going to do it, and then website, social media, like create like a blog, a podcast, create all of those avenues that will kind of showcase or put you under the spotlight. Because if people know about your campaign and your cause and they can align themselves to it, then asking for money is a lot easier. Okay. I also chose to separate, and this is something that's different in the UK to here, to separate the campaign sponsorship and the ask for money from the fundraising. So everyone that donated to the campaign knew that they were donating and helping me get to the start line. Those that were supporting the charities were donating to the charities. So we kind of separated those two pots. Whereas in the UK, depending on the charity that you're working with and how you go about it, typically you would enter into like a contract with them, as well as some of the sponsors. So it was pretty black and white where the money was going to, and whether it was a 70-30 split or a 60 or 50-50 split, whatever it may be. You work that out with this other charity, so there's one pot, and then the money gets worked out like that. It's just how different people approach different things. So once you've got kind of all that decided, then it's a case of shouting it from the rooftops, and use family, friends, work colleagues, school friends, school teachers, and then try to have others speak on your behalf. So very fortunately for me, my nephew helped me with the websites and the design and all the other creative stuff. And he's located up there in Brooklyn and happened to know someone that had their own podcast that had a huge following, and he found my story interesting, should I say. And then he interviewed me, and literally overnight, my Instagram following went from like 24 people to nearly 1,200. Now, that didn't necessarily equate to dollars rolling in to either of the campaign pots, but it gives you a voice, and it increases the noise that you start to make, and then you just keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And then it's a case of trying to find organizations that may align themselves with your campaign. So I went after some contacts of mine that I knew that their companies were very supportive of veterans and would potentially be a good partner. And you then just flat out ask them. And some want a more formal presentation, some want to just a casual chat. They run it past their board and they'll cut you a check. So, like I said, no real cookie cutter solution other than have it well planned out, know what to pitch, who to pitch it to, and then just be relentless. And hopefully then you'll get a couple of good anchor sponsors. And then I was fortunate that, like I said, so 7-Eleven were a big supporter of mine very early on, aligned with the campaign, good organization. And then they started to connect me with partners of theirs. And I would say that I probably got easily a quarter of my food or my calories were donated. So it's not just a case of let me get a lump of cash and pay for stuff. If you can get goods in kind, services in kind, so like shipping companies, flights, foul weather clothing, look at the list that you get in terms of what is required by the race and what is going to be checked off at the start of the race, and then start contacting all those companies. And you just never know where that support is going to come from.
Okay, that's good advice. When you talk about the campaign, is that who you're aligned with for your charity and what you're going to do with your planning, or are there different types of campaigns that I don't know about?
Yeah, I refer to it as the campaign. So for me, the campaign, because I set up Tame the Kraken as a 501c3. So those that were donating to the charities could obviously benefit from the tax benefits as such. The campaign was kind of my get to the start line and across. So you had the charity fundraising that again was all for the charities and the impact that they had, and then you had the campaign, which was the boats getting to the start line and getting across safely. And while they are interwoven, it was just easy for me to sort of plan one to the other, and then obviously accounting for funds, operating a 501c3. And again, that's one of those decisions that you make early on, and that's just what worked well for me and how I set it up. Is it necessary? Not really, but it just seemed right, because our hope is obviously to continue with Tame the Kraken and continue to have an impact for those veterans that are dealing with all the mental health stuff.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. That's helpful. I wasn't sure about that dual component, how you could separate them, and I've been hearing different ways of separating, so it's good to hear a different perspective on it. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's see. So you said you had about 18 months before, but a little bit less before you had to have everything into Pallister. When did you start physically training?
So, again, I was in the military for 12 years. I played rugby for that. I've always stayed physical. Mm-hmm. It was just kind of by happen chance. I travel a lot anyway, so my training schedule is on the road, at home. I've got my gym at home. So physical exercise is part of my life anyway. I get cranky if I don't train.
I get the same way.
So like 2-3 months before deciding that rowing the Atlantic was a good idea, I joined a CrossFit type gym, more just because it was easy not to think about what I wanted to do that day. Yeah. Kind of really enjoyed that. The coach is fantastic, and so I was already kind of gearing up, and it just aligned perfectly. So I kind of just was doing those CrossFit type sessions from the get-go. And then I would say about 8 months out, started to focus more on being sports specific. And I say that, so just like you, one of the first things that I did is reach out to other solo rowers. The first one, I think, or one of the guys that I really learned a lot from was Matteo, who's the solo winner for the 2015 race. He himself grew up on the Italian lakes, rowed his entire life. The family business was building and fixing boats. And I think one of the best pieces of advice that he gave me, he said, look, don't do too much rowing. He said, because number one, it won't equate with rowing on an ocean, either erg or flat water. It won't make sense, and there will be some people that will literally row 2 million miles on an erg in preparation, and it could even be counterproductive in the sense of injuries, boredom, all those sort of stuff. Yeah. So he said, now, that's not to say you shouldn't row, but he said focus more on perfecting your technique in the sense of being injury proofed.
Yeah.
Because, okay, the mechanics are the same, but the stroke rate is a lot lower. The body is going to be contorted in strange positions with the wave action. And really, it's a case of having good technique that will get you across the Atlantic efficiently, but without developing injuries or weaknesses because of poor technique. He said, and then focus more on stuff that beats you up and makes you uncomfortable, which, spending 12 plus years in the Marines and Special Forces, I was used to. I'm like, oh, now
got that down.
Now I can relate. I can beat myself up and enjoy it. And that was, and he said, look, I did circuit training, I did kickboxing, I did this, that, and the other. So CrossFit, Olympic lifting, all those sort of things that will strengthen your core, add to mobility, was what I was doing. And then 8 months out, started to tweak that. And then I would say probably 4 months out, I moved everything to trying to pack on usable muscle weight. So changed the diet and looked at things that were more full body, compound lifts that were going to strengthen my core and my posterior chain, knowing that you're going to be sat on a rowing seat for 12 to 15 hours a day for 60 days. And that, I mean, I think I couldn't have asked for anything better. And plus, when you look at my boat in the UK, and you have to do a minimum of 96 hours of training on the boat as per the race regulations. So I blocked off a week last summer and did just close to 100 hours, literally in 4 days. I just lived on the boat because I didn't know when I would get back. I thought I would get another opportunity to go back and do some more training on the boat, but work and life got in the way. So I spent 4 days on my boat before arriving in La Gomera. So I didn't see my boat then for another 4 months. But I don't think I could have, I wasn't disadvantaged when I look at some of the other teams who probably did, I don't know, 2 or 3 times more time on their own boats. Mm-hmm. I think I benefited by, my background and being comfortable in that ocean environment anyway, confident in the boat and how it was set up, keeping things simple, stupid. But then I focused more on my diet. I focused on, again, the training and bulking up and, again, being injury proof. Sol Gav was another guy that I'd spoken to, and he said, look, everything you're doing is what I did, and do everything with the aim of when you arrive in La Gomera, you are injury free, and then you're in a good place.
I totally agree. That's kind of my view on it. The more you can do that, the more likely you're to be injury proof while you're there and just deal with other things that come your way.
Yeah. And there's so much that goes on in that week that you're in the car park or before the boats go into the water in La Gomera that you want to focus on not having anything else to really do other than unpack, check off, and repack your boats. Right? Everything should be done before you arrive in La Gomera. If it isn't, then it puts you under a little bit more mental stress, and it makes for a less enjoyable time before the race starts.
Gotcha. So you packed the boat before you left, and then when you got there, you unpacked and checked and repacked.
No, totally opposite. I carried close to 200 pounds worth of equipment and food with me, because I didn't get the opportunity to get back, and that was one of the disadvantages of being on a different continent. So I'm getting
that's right.
equipment and food given to me over here, which I then had to take with me. So I would say that the boat was 90%. I packed in the sense of, yes, it's shipped with all that equipment in it. But for pre-race scrutineering, you have to have everything laid off, like right down to the meal. You have to have every meal laid out, everything per the race regulations. You have to check it, you have to prep it, it has to be all checked off, and then you pack the boat ready for the race.
Yeah.
And again, my advice would that be is make sure you've got everything sorted before you go. So literally all you have to do is lay it out, check it off, pack it once, and you're good to go. And like I said, being a solo, it's sometimes easier because you've only got one set of equipment that you need to lay out and pack. And you don't have to sort of liaise with other team members. Now, I did have two people out there in La Gomera helping me pull all that stuff together. So you need more hands to literally lay stuff out and run things around and do all the other bits and pieces. But it should be 99% sorted before you even turn up is my advice. Because again, now if you are ready, you can say, hey, race officials, check my boat first, because you have to kind of book a time slot, lay it out, get it all checked off. If it's not ready to pass, at least you've got a couple of days then to either get more kit, get stuff shipped out, fix stuff, whatever it may be. And again, you can do that at a leisurely pace rather than turning up and you're missing stuff and you've got to find it, because La Gomera is, while you can find a lot of stuff there, it's not somewhere you can wander down the street and say, oh, I forgot a piece of equipment and find it easily enough. So, those are the sort of things that you need to take the time, make sure you've got everything, and then one and done. Then literally you can, when the boats go in the water, you can go and play around with a fully laden boat, because it is very different than the boat that's not laden. Like you're talking solo boat at the start of the race, it's going to be around about a ton in weight. So it behaves differently. So it may be that you need to move stuff around the boat so the balance and the ballast is all nicely set up for when you start. And then you can practice a few other things, like you can run your water maker, make sure there's no technical problems there. You can practice deploying sea anchors and drogues and those sort of things, if you so wish. But to be honest, when I got there, I ran the water maker because you need to, and then I think I went out, rode around for 20, 40 minutes a couple of times. I took my kids out for a little bit of a row just for something fun to do, and that was it. I didn't do any training per se in La Gomera because you've got 3,000 miles to practice.
Yep. That's your time to be on land and get out of the boat.
Yeah, and like I said, just start to prepare yourself mentally, because I've always been a loner by nature, so I'm comfortable with my own company. And you're never really on your own anyway, because you've got radios with passing boats, you've got satellite phones, so you have the opportunity to connect with people almost on a daily basis. Okay. I had Roy as well that I can have a conversation with. So it's not, that to me wasn't a difficult piece. Being alone on the water, again, wasn't really a concern. It's when things start to happen that it can mess with you mentally, depending on, again, your game plan, where your head's at, how prepared you are, those sort of things. It's really where it's a mental aspect. And then injury, illness, good days, bad days, it all then starts to come together. I think, for me personally, I was ready for pretty much anything and everything, based on my background, my preparation for the campaign, anything by itself, whether it was hard days rowing, whether it was lack of sleep, equipment failure, I was ready for. But when you then start to see them stack up on each other, so you've got poor weather, you're tired through lack of sleep, you've got lack of energy because you haven't eaten much because of food poisoning, and then something else happens. That's when the mental weight can really drag you down into some dark places. And that's sort of stuff that you can't necessarily prepare for.
Yeah.
As a team, again, you'll have good days and bad days. And if you've come together as a team, someone may be having a bad day where others are having good days, and that will help cancel itself out. Or if you've got good team dynamics, you can all pull through for each other. As a solo, some days you're just in a very dark place, and it's a struggle to get your head back in the game. And that's where having a good team on the other end of the phone or on the other end of an email, I think is very important. It wasn't something that I had planned that well, but it naturally came together. The people that I had supporting me were a big part of my success, and they knew me well enough to kind of offer words of encouragement, offer just a virtual shoulder to cry on, or occasionally kind of reach down the phone and verbally give you a slap around the face and just say, get on with it. So if you've got people like that you can identify and talk through and include in the process, it will benefit you at some point while out on the water.
That is good advice. I will put together a land-based team. So you mentioned, I remember one of your Instagram things where you were having one of those rough patches, and how it was hard for you to get out of the cabin. What was the longest period that you weren't at the oars?
Oh,
and is that okay to do? Everything I hear is 2 hours, but as a solo,
yeah, and that's the difference. As a solo, yes, and to some extent, I did fall into that kind of 2 hour thing, but that's more of a team thing. Teams, whether you're a pair, a 3, 4, or 5, it's 2 hours on, 2 hours off, and that is the general cadence that you try to work to. As a solo, you don't have that luxury. Now, that's not to say you can't develop a routine, but you have to be far more tactical and use the weather to your advantage. And it would be nice to say, yes, I worked this sort of routine, but there were times where either the weather was against you or there were other factors that would mess with your routine. So you try to develop a routine based on what's happening around you, how you feel, what you feel that you could sustain, and really there are a number of things that interfere with you. So, the first day, because you're running on pure adrenaline, when you cross that start line, I think I rode continuously for almost 7 hours, but it felt like 2. And because all I can remember kind of waiting for the island to shrink, and you're looking off to the left and you can see lights, and looking off to the right you can see lights of the other boats, and you're just kind of going. And then at some point you think, I need to stop and eat, I need to stop and use the bathroom, whatever it may be. And then from that point you start to kind of settle down. I think I settled down quite quickly, certainly within the first 24 hours. I started to get comfortable with a routine. I was very fortunate that I didn't suffer at all with seasickness, whereas a lot of the other teams, they had individuals that were struck. So again, sometimes it's hard to drag someone out of their cabin or put them in the rowing seat when they're vomiting every 20 minutes or so. And then to answer your question, there were some of those darkest days when, yes, you've got all the other stuff going on, but the weather is against you. And we got struck fairly early on in the race by a period of no weather. To some extent, it was slightly against us. So going on to power anchor and sitting idle when you're still relatively fresh and kind of pumped up because of the challenge, to sit for a day and a half or like nearly 24 hours was, I mean, crushing. So that was kind of one thing that I think I wasn't prepared for. I think the fleet in general were ready for big waves and the potential of capsize and all those sort of things that we saw from last year's race and subsequent past races. But flat, calm seas with no wind or rain, we weren't prepared for. And I can remember that first period, like rowing literally through treacle, getting nowhere, sun beating down on me, starting to get dehydrated and kind of frustrated. So I thought, right, power anchor it is. Power anchor out. Then you're like, oh, that's not so bad. And after a couple of hours, you're rested, recuperated, you have something to eat. And then it's like now what? Conditions haven't changed. And you're like, I'm going to sit here and sit here and sit here. And it's like the 8-hour mark, and you are literally crawling up the walls of the cabin because it's hot and uncomfortable and you're bored. And then I think it was some period after that 8-hour thing, I thought, right, I'm just going to go for it. So I pulled in the anchor and tried to carry on rowing, drifted back 2 miles and went, yeah, this is not smart. And so deployed the power anchor again. And then sat it out for, I think, another 6 or 8 hours or more before the weather did change and could start making forward progress again. So that is a good example where not spending time on the oars can be frustrating. But when, I think my worst period was we had some. It wasn't completely flat calm, but the weather wasn't great. There was no real wind assistance. They were long, hard, hot days, and I suffered a bout of food poisoning. So again, top tip: don't eat food that tastes weird. So I had
a good one.
Yeah, I had a meal, and the first bite, I went, that doesn't taste right. I went, oh, it'll be okay. No, like 6 hours later, then it wasn't okay. And while I recovered in terms of from the effects of the food poisoning relatively quick, it sapped the energy out of you. Or that was me. So I suffered for about 3.5 days where you're dehydrated, you have no energy. And then when it's, okay, now the weather's in the wrong direction, my auto helm is playing up, and it's like I just don't have the energy to pull myself out of the cabin. That's really when you need to sort of figure out, would it be more beneficial to maybe rest 2 hours instead of the hour? Will I recover faster? So you've got to almost play the long game. And I was reflecting on this just the other day. I think the first time I put the power anchor out, no, it wasn't. It was a drogue. So I think it was my auto helm. The first time it stopped working. There was
How many times did it stop working?
Oh, almost daily.
Oh wow.
I'll come on to that in a moment. So it was the first time it happened. It was that night. It was cross seas. And I kind of rushed to put out a drogue to prevent some drift, or just to stabilize things so I could figure out what I was doing. And then in retrospect, I'm thinking, well, slow down. Deploying and recovering a sea anchor and or a drogue, the smoother you play it out, the more the careful you are obviously lessens the risk of damage to the piece of equipment or to the boat or to yourself. And if the sea is slightly against you, losing, I don't know, a couple of 100 yards in the grand scheme of things is nothing. So again, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Those sort of mantras that you've got to keep saying to yourself. And I did have a number of those mantras that I did often have running through my head. It's like, if you didn't know what you wanted to do, whether the weather or how you felt or anything, just row. And after 20 minutes, 60 minutes, you will have come to a decision of what you want to do. So try to keep the boat moving. Try to maximize your time on the oars, I think, is the best way to answer that question in a very long-winded way. And then you will fall into a routine that you find fits you maybe that day or that period of time. I think if you go back and look at my crossing and the route that I took, I think it was probably one of the most efficient routes. When looking at dealing with a faulty auto helm, food poisoning, and the weather that we had to deal with and all the rest of it, I think I had a very efficient crossing. And actually on some days I probably were one of the most efficient boats out on there. I can remember one period of time the weather was in an awful direction, and I think a lot of the fleet, certainly the rear third of the fleet, may have done about 8 or 9 miles in a 24-hour period, where I did closer to 40. So, and again, all credit goes to the Silver Fox, who was my weather writer. He lives on a yacht now. He's already helped weather out others across the Atlantic in the Vaughan. He's passionate about it, both the weather and the weather writing, and kind of all the other bits and pieces that you don't initially think of. Being a sailor, there's some great advice that can apply to not necessarily rowing an ocean, but certainly crossing an ocean. And other than the start, where you have to clear the islands and for safety reasons and kind of get south and into the area where you pick up the trade winds, and probably the last 900 or 1,000 miles, as long as you're kind of heading west, you're in good shape. Mm-hmm. So everyone, I think, is focused on, yes, this bearing or that bearing, or you want to be at this latitude. For a good portion of the crossing, you can literally be going northwest, southwest, northwest, east. You can literally just point that way and just keep rowing, and then just start to refine things closer to the western side of things.
I remember seeing the boats pointed in very different directions at some point.
Yeah, and sometimes you're only separated by a couple of 100 miles, and the weather can be radically different. So that's, again, going back to your game plan. My plan was just to get to the other side. I was hoping to do it in 50 days or less, and that was obviously based on previous races and kind of boat design and all the other factors. So I thought that was a good target to hit, and that would average around about 60 miles a day. But that's with a reasonable trade wind that's helping you along the way. Like I said, we had no real help in that sense. So it was a case of do what you can with what you've got. And I think my best day was just over 67 miles, and I think my worst day was -2.
That's not too bad.
Yeah. And it comes down to kind of that tactical approach. And if you look at, on day 2, I injured my knee, which affected my ability to row, certainly for that week. Then day 4 was when my auto helm first packed up, and I basically nursed it through for it died again on the final in the final 2 miles. So that ability to MacGyver your way through things, I think, is a good skill to develop. If you look at the boat and what's on it, schoolboy error on my behalf. I asked the question, what's the one piece of equipment that's likely to break, and it's the rudder helm. I was going to get a second one and then somehow didn't. So my advice to solo rowers is take 2 auto helms and swap them every 4 to 6 hours, depending on how hard they're working. And then that way, because the thing that it's the electrical motor that burns out. So you need to rest that up. Now, that's because of the weather that we have, is typically across the boat. So the auto helms are working harder than they perhaps would do on a sailing ship or a vessel. They're good for a certain number of hours, but if you can either rest them or rotate them out, then they're going to last longer. I didn't have that option. So going back to your routine question, when I got it working again, I think what I would do is I would row for 3 hours and then rest an hour during the day. And then at night, I was doing sort of 2 hours on, 2 hours off. But within that period, I was still resting the auto helm. And there were some days where either the weather wasn't that tough that I didn't use it at all. I literally just locked off the steering on a general bearing and rode a couple of days without it at all. And then one afternoon, I had a light bulb moment. I'm thinking, okay, it's the motor that overheats. How can I cool the motor down? So a couple of baby wipes, the USB fan that I had, which had a long cable on it. I basically rigged a cooling system inside the tiller area of the boat. And every hour I'd go back in and re-wet the baby wipes. And that probably lowered the temperature around the motor by 5 or 10 degrees, which then allowed me to run the auto helm longer. So that then helped me increase my miles, because it was less about how long I could stay on the oars. It was how long could I point in the right direction and be on the oars. So my first piece of advice would be take a second auto helm, or if you can afford it, maybe even a third, and then rotate them so you're not faced with that problem, and then that way you can focus more on the rowing and on how you feel and less about the equipment. But then when you look at being Miss MacGyver, look at everything on the boat that could break, and then know how to fix it.
Yeah. Whether
that's an electrical piece of equipment, whether that's a mechanical piece of equipment, or whether it's as simple as the bearings in the wheels on your rowing seat.
I talked to Susan, who theirs broke, their seats.
Yeah.
And I was like, all right, what did you do? Like, how did you fix this?
I think they used chewing gum or something, didn't they?
They might have. I remember that they went through like 3 different parts, and it was the part where the wheel connected with the axle, and it was not thick enough. And they went through all their tape first. I don't remember what they did after the tape.
Yeah, and that's what you do. You get creative. So in preparation, go through the boat and be intimately familiar with everything, inside and out. And I think that's where, when I did my on-boat training, I lived on the boat. Even when the night before we put the boat in the water, I still lived on the boat. I slept in the boat, on the trailer, in the parking lot. Because that way you can immerse yourself into it, and you get to see how comfortable it is, what pieces of equipment will make your life on board more comfortable. And more importantly, stuff that you don't need. I didn't take anything on board while I took a book thinking that, oh, who knows, I might want to read, and it never came out of its plastic cover. And it was just dead weight. So look at things that you really need to help cross the ocean, and then maybe think of, I don't know, one luxury. So music, audiobooks was kind of my thing. Beanbag chair, which I thought was more therapeutic than anything else, and that was, in my opinion, one of the most valuable pieces of equipment on the boat.
What did you do with the beanbag chair? Is that what you slept on?
Yeah, so the cabin was too hot to sleep in. So even when the weather was bad, I would basically get in my foul weather clothing and just still sleep out on deck. But having something soft to sit on, even like the padding, the cushions in your cabins, are not that comfortable. But the beanbag chair was just awesome. And you could sit back in that. It would relieve the stress on your back and on your backside and on your knees. And then, sleeping up on deck for that, an hour of more restful sleep that can take all that pressure off your aching joints was again, I don't think I could put a price on it. And the chair probably cost me $25.
Are you talking like a normal size beanbag chair or like a baby one?
It was a child's chair.
Okay.
It's both. And then I think I removed maybe a quarter of the beads, so it was a little bit more compact. But it would mold perfectly into the kind of where the seat would run up and down. So I could put it up near the front of the rowing deck, lay back in that, put my knees up on the actual rowing seat, and life was good.
That is a great idea. Well done. You have given me so much information that I never even thought of that is extremely useful. So Thank you. It's amazing.
And then kind of, and everyone's slightly different, but if you think of like your 3 points of contact, so basically your hands, your backside, and your feet. Everyone gets so caught up in, well, what shall I do with my feet and my rowing straps and the foot plates and all the rest of it? Again, because I was separated from my boat, all my training was either done on my water rower or on the rowing machine, wearing essentially Metcons, like CrossFit shoes. I didn't have the time or the inclination really to say, let me get windsurfing neoprene straps and let me do this and like let me row barefoot. I'm like, what's the point? It's another thing that could go wrong or mess up. I've trained always wearing shoes, so I'll wear shoes. Or the only
Did
thing
you bring Metcons with you?
Yeah, I still use them in the gym today. So they've crossed an Atlantic, and I still wear them in the gym today. I mean,
awesome.
So credit to Nike for a good quality pair of shoes. The only thing I've changed is I've put a new set of laces in them.
That's reasonable.
So now with that, what you're going to do with your feet, what you're going to do with your hands, and what you're going to do with your backside. So the feet, didn't worry about it. Obviously, you have to have certain spare straps and so foot plates, all that. Never had a problem. The shoes were great, and I bought some bamboo socks. It's bamboo, hard wearing, antibacterial. I had 6 pairs. I think I wore 4 of them, and then to just wash them and dry them out. So again, good hygiene. Never had a single issue. Didn't have a single blister. I think I posted up a picture of my tan lines with my feet on Instagram because it's quite fun. You get to the other end and you get to Antigua and you're walking around and you're nicely tanned, but I had like white feet. So then the next thing, obviously, your hands. Yes, I did have like Concept 2 rowing pads. I also had some sailing gloves, leather sailing gloves. But to be honest, I went without anything on my hands. I think I picked a couple of blisters up in the first couple of days, just because you're, again, probably gripping the oars too much and you're creating a few friction points. In my training, I kind of toughened my hands up anyway. A lot of farmers carries, a lot of barbell work, so the hands really didn't suffer at all. I wore the sailing gloves when it was raining just to get a better purchase on the oars. And then I used the rowing pads just occasionally to change your grip. So it's just like when you move a patient around in a bed so they don't get bed sores. So you're moving those friction points around. But again, the hands, I didn't have any problems with at all. And
Did
then
you
the back,
get the claw when you came back?
No, none at all. Now, I think I had a particularly really kind of tough day when I was training in the UK, coming in off the North Sea, and the tides were against me, and I was trying to get across the sandbar before the tides ran out. So I tore my hands up pretty badly, and it was because I was gripping the oars too tightly. So again, just having a very nice, relaxed technique. I didn't suffer from claw hand at all.
Awesome.
And so I was very fortunate on that. And I think, again, it's just a case of knowing how to grip an oar and to relax the hands and almost let go of the oars on that return stroke. Just comes down to a bit of practice. And then the backside piece. So, again, during the training, spent 100 hours on the basic seat that came with the boat, and didn't have a problem at all, because I did a 24-hour row on an erg just before Christmas, fairly early on in setting the campaign up, and after about 40 minutes, my backside was killing. I thought, right, seat comfort, it just got elevated up in my list of priorities. But when I was training, had no problems at all. So I spoke to Angus from Rannoch, and obviously he's rowed 3 oceans, and he said, look, I just used these Concept 2 pads that are self-adhesive. And I think they're like $3 each. So I bought like 6 of those. I had like a roll mat, some foam that I had on board. I didn't even pre-cut it, but then one afternoon when I was just bored, I took one of the Concept 2 pads, a marker, and cut out some hard foam. And then I probably built my seat 4 times out during the crossing. So I started off with no seat cover, then added 1 pad, then added a pad and a piece of foam, and then another pad, and then I took that apart and changed it up. So changing the height, changing kind of the seat picture based on what was hurting, to move that pressure around. Now I didn't suffer like some people suffer in terms of salt sores and like the backside problems that I'm sure you'll see horrific pictures of. I had a couple of sores and kind of spots on the one cheek, but not on the other cheek, which is kind of odd, because I'm thinking, and it may have been, like I said, a lot of our weather came in from like the southeast, so maybe I was putting more pressure on my right cheek as opposed to my left cheek. So my right cheek suffered worse than my left cheek, but not as bad as most people. Plus, again, I found it interesting to kind of rebuild your seat, and when you get it just perfect, it's like, it's those little things. So experiment in training, what works, and then have options, but keep it simple. Like some people have like sheepskins, and they had all these other different options, which adds weight to the boat, adds clutter to the boat, where I had something that was very light, very simple, and I could swap things in and out in a matter of seconds. So that is your 3 points of contact, because you can't escape. Yes, you can stand up for periods of times, you can stretch off, but you find yourself laying on your backside more than anything else. What I also found as well, because I didn't get in and out of the cabin as much because of my injury on my knee, I also attached a strip of foam in front of the cabin, so when I'm kneeling down, instead of kneeling on a hard deck, I was kneeling on something soft. So those little things are little tricks that just add to that comfort level or prevent further injury. Yeah. So spend time on the boat and not, let me go out and row for 8 hours. I live on the boat for periods of time. I think is very, very, very beneficial, because you can learn where you want to store stuff, things that are convenient. Now, you have to have this very extensive toolkit as part of the race regulations, but the only pieces of that I used was a knife or a Stanley blade, a screwdriver, and a 13mm ring spanner or wrench, whatever you call it. That's all. So I would have that in a separate bag. And electrical tape. Electrical tape, those items, and you can keep it all in the bag, and that's pretty much all you need. In that same bag, I would also look at putting fuses. I didn't have any fuses go, but it's probably better to have them close at hand if they did go. Electrical tape, super glue. I think super glue or Gorilla Glue, whatever works for you, so you can fix stuff. I broke one of the blades off my electric fan the one day, and then it created it to vibrate. And when you're trying to sleep, that noise can be annoying. So I repaired my fan. I repaired a few other things. Super glue is pretty much an important piece to keep. Obviously, duct tape, that's equally as important for the big jobs, from fixing your pad or your seat to your pad or vice versa. Stopping your flag from flapping around. Then you get creative. And then I would take, I think you only have to carry 2 spare wheel seats, or seats for wheel. I had 2 collapse and a third one that was starting to break down, which wasn't a problem because I had a complete different rowing seat that I could have swapped out if I wanted to. But again, for ease, having the ability to change all 4 wheels would be good. And that's pretty much it. Some of the other things are fairly basic, like you don't have to add swivels on your sea drogues. At the time I used the sea drogue, I then took probably 20 minutes to unknot the line after I brought it in, because it had kind of coiled up on itself. So having a swivel would have prevented that. Those little things you probably won't even use, but if you do, it makes life easier.
Okay. A swivel, like almost like the fishing, when you fish and you have a little swivel?
Yeah, so you have to have, on the sea anchor especially, as well as on the main anchor that attaches the lines, you have to have a proper, when I say swivel, they are actually quite expensive. But on the sea drogue you don't. But if you think sea drogue is smaller than your sea anchor, it's also going to spin because of the current and the action of the boat. So putting a decent, more expensive line and a swivel in that line, typically where the line attaches to the drogue, will just make recovery a lot quicker and easier if you did have to use it more than once. I used it once and then kind of went, that's a pain in the ass. And I thought, now if I had a swivel on there, life would be a lot easier. And I where's my? I've pretty much had a journal every day, and in the back of that journal, because I've got a friend that's doing it this year as a solo as well, I compiled like, if I had my time again, these are the things that I needed to know. And there's a few other things that are in there as well. More hot sauce. I like my food spicy, and some of the food manufacturers that would like say spicy noodles, and it's like, yeah, those are not spicy at all. So you break out the hot sauce, and even though I had 2 bottles, I pretty much ran out in the first 3 weeks.
Oh wow!
So I had this standing joke with the race officials, like, yeah, anyone speak to, like, I need a resupply of hot sauce, more hot sauce. Yeah, that's kind of pretty much it. I probably answer more questions, but my advice would be, like I said, put the work in the preparation, arrive in La Gomera with the boat, all the equipment ready to pack and one and done, turn out injury proof, and then think of, again, those 3 points of contact, because that's where you're going to suffer the most: hands, feet, and backside, providing everything else is working in your favor.
Awesome. You answered every question I had. You somehow just knew and went to that next. It was amazing.
Funny that, isn't it?
It was perfect. Thank you so much. This was really helpful. Is it okay if I reach out to you if I have other questions as I get closer?
No, that's it. One and done.
Man.
No, please do. Yeah, whether it's by email, if you want to jump on another call, happy to answer any other questions. And you'll find that stuff will pop up as you get really into the thick of things. And I'm happy to share all those top tips, or even just talk through stuff. I don't say I've got all the answers, but I'm happy to share what I do have.
I really appreciate that. I never would have thought of the swivel, and it's something so tiny but makes a huge difference.
And I'm a little bit weird and anal when it comes to some things like that. I was a former draftsman, kind of engineer, so I look at things a little bit more practically. Mm-hmm. And it's again funny. I haven't posted it up. I should do. I need to edit it down and post it up. So when I crossed the finish line after battling for my life for about 2 hours outside the harbour, I came in, and I didn't have an opportunity to turn on the cameras, kind of that final approach, because there was too much crazy stuff going on. So when I got into the harbour and across the finish line, and now you have a short 5-minute row into kind of alongside the dock where you step off the boat, and that's where everybody welcomes you. So I switched on a GoPro that I had on board and rode in, and obviously do all the welcome ceremonies. They take all the pictures. Then you step on, and then everyone forgets the boat. Or you've got some of the safety officials that stand behind you to stop you falling back into the boat, or while you're getting interviewed and so forth. Obviously, the camera's still rolling, and I didn't see this until 2 or 3 days later. And Lee and Manny, two of the race officials, safety officers, and so forth. But you can't hear what's going on, but you can only see what they're pointing at the boat and commenting back and forth and laughing and joking and looking back at the boat and gesturing back and forth. And then they pull out their camera and they start taking pictures of my boat. And this is literally within 2 or 3 minutes of arriving. You can see me in the background and all the other stuff going on. I'm like, what are they doing? And it was my wife actually that saw them do this, because they had a different perspective and obviously wasn't getting interviewed. I went up to Lee the following day and was like, I saw you went taking pictures of the boat and commenting on things like, was there something wrong? And Lee actually says, well, no, actually the opposite. He said, in all the years that I've been supporting this race, I've never seen a boat come into the finish line so clean. He said, in fact, Manny even said that it looked like it was just starting the race, not finishing it. He said, there was nothing out of place. He said, he even commented, like, before you step on board, you may want to take your shoes off. And then he opens up the cabin because he has to, like, recover your passport, and he opens it up and he's like, oh, there it is. Like, he said it was just well laid out, and again, the difference between perhaps someone that's been in the Marines or in the military as opposed to other races. He said, but no, it was pristine. He said, he'd never seen a boat so clean. So you may even see that feature in the ocean rowing course at some point. He was just amazed at how clean it was. But I put that down to, again, I had nothing on board that wasn't of value in crossing the ocean, no luxuries, and just good housekeeping. If I didn't need it, then it didn't need to be out on deck. If I wasn't using it, then it was tucked away somewhere else. So it makes sense in terms of you're not going to lose something, you're not going to break something, it's not going to get in the way. And then the good hygiene stuff is just probably back to my military training days, that you have to look after your equipment and you look after yourself, and then everything else pretty much takes care of itself. So I wasn't exactly going for the cleanest boat award. It was just me.
That's a pretty cool story. I like that. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
That brings me to a question, though.
Yeah, go ahead.
How often were you cleaning the barnacles off the bottom?
So I think the first time was a little bit longer than ideal. I would say maybe 2 weeks in. It was actually that period where we were on sea anchor. It was hot, it was miserable, and I thought, let me do something productive. So I jumped in, not out of, I need to clean the boat. It was like, I need to do something and maybe cool off. And actually getting in the water by yourself with a few miles below you and you don't know quite what's under the boat is a little unnerving to begin with. But so one of the other kind of funny stories, I thought I was being clever. Again, I'm glad you brought it up because some of the schoolboy era. I elected to take a full face, like, snorkeling mask. And in training, it was great. It fit well. It was having an integral snorkel. And I was thinking, again, less stuff to worry about. Just put it on. I get in, clean the boat, get out. Life is good. Well, that's fine when your beard, or my beard, not saying that you have a beard or you grow a beard, but as your beard grows, trying to get a seal on this mask failed. And I didn't have a backup. Plus, again, I mentioned I had eye surgery, so I couldn't necessarily get in the water without having something to protect my eyes, and plus you need to see what you're doing.
Yeah.
So that was a concern of mine, because after that first time, I was trying to clean the bottom of the boat maybe every 5 to 7 days. And again, you try to time that with what the weather's doing, your need perhaps to cool off. Like, is it advantageous to, again, give you that extra knot in speed? That sort of stuff. So because I didn't have a functioning mask, I did have a set of almost like motorcycle goggles, but they were a little bit more tighter fitting. And I think I got a couple of pictures towards the end where you see me wearing these goggles, and I did have a bad eye. But they're not watertight. They're literally just windproof. So again, this is when your MacGyver skills come out. So I'm sat there thinking, how can I do this? The electrical tape. Again, I basically then sealed up all the holes and then built up enough of a pad around the eye sockets to at least give me like 20 seconds worth of water time before the water filled the mask up, and then I'd have to empty it again, which is enough literally to duck dive under, clean a section of the boat, come up, empty the mask, and repeat it. So after that first time, I'm struggling with the proper face mask. My improvised mask carried me through until that last week, when I then had to pull the tape off and use it more to protect my eye. And by that stage, the weather was that bad that a clean boat was probably not, I mean, a barnacle-free boat was probably not as important.
Yeah.
So again, another top tip, simple, stupid, a normal pair of swimming goggles, take a spare set, is probably the best bet. You don't need a dive mask. It depends on how comfortable you are in the water. If you hold your breath enough, it's enough to get under and really get underneath the boat and clean it. I think those first few times when you go under and all of a sudden you've got this fish staring back at you, can startle you a little bit. But other than that, so my preference, if I had to do my time again, I would just take a regular set of swimming goggles, or take two, because I would take a spare. But a lot of people use the simple diving mask and snorkel. And I kind of got very efficient. It would take me flat, calm water, I could probably clean the boat in 30 minutes. If it was a little rough where you're having to hold on and getting bounced around, or more importantly, avoiding the boat from coming down on your head as it gets picked up by the waves, it may take you 45 minutes to clean the boat. And again, what I would do, I would run my water maker, fill up a bucket with 3/4 worth of fresh water. I'd get in, clean the bottom of the boat, get back on, use that fresh water then to clean my belt, any other water equipment that went in the water, so it's free of salt water, and then use that water left over to bathe, so you get all the salt water off you and freshen yourself up, and then use that same water to clean my shorts and my socks. And then you do that, and I would rotate shorts and socks back, so I always had clean clothing kind of every 5 days.
Every 5 days?
Yeah.
Okay.
And you're, like you said, you're cleaning yourself several times a day. But if you're typically only wearing either shorts or minimal clothing, I know a lot of people row naked. I occasionally rode naked, but I couldn't get on with it. I didn't feel comfortable.
It's one of those things I feel like you have to try since everyone says it. Yeah,
and some people swear by it. Me, not so much. What I had my shoes and socks on. What worked well for me, I used to do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and you can buy kind of these shorts that are seamless. The seams are kind of on the outer side of your thighs or your hips. They were perfect. They were durable. They were comfortable. They dried out quickly. They were easy to wash. And I'm sure that there are female equivalents of those. If you go online to an MMA store, a shop or whatever, there's probably plenty of options. Practice again. Find what works. Try it out on an erg, because that's normally what's more comfortable. Try something out in training, and then find what works and pick 3 sets of them. So I had 3 sets of shorts. I had multiple T-shirts, but they were almost disposable because a lot of my sponsors, I just used their T-shirts to advertise them as well. And then I think I had, like I said, the 6 pair of socks, which were pretty much nominal in weight, and that was it. You don't need anything else. I had 3 sets of hats actually, because I did lose one. That was the only thing I lost over over the side of the boat was one of my hats. I was taking a plastic seal off an MCT oil from the food stuff, and the wind kicked up, and that piece of plastic went flying, and I grabbed that, but in the process of not littering the planet, my hat then blew off, and then I couldn't save it in time, and that was my Wilson moment. I saw my hat get carried away on the wave. Go, Wilson, I'm sorry. So yeah, that's kind of the more of those two questions you have, I probably have the answer. I just can't recall them until you ask that question.
No, you have recalled so much. I am so very impressed. Very impressed.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Ocean Rowing Podcast with Tim Crockett of Tame the Kraken. And in the next episode, I will give you some information on things that I found while I was in Florida a week or two ago, and how I started to take some steps to start my ocean crossing and what that means to me. So I hope you enjoy it, and I will see you guys in 2 weeks.